and gentlemen, please welcome Intel Architecture Group Vice President and General Manager of the Data Center Software Division, Mr. Boyd Davis.
Good morning. It's great to have you all here in the beautiful Julia Morgan Ballroom in San Francisco, and it's also wonderful to have those of you who could join us online for a pretty significant announcement for Intel. You know, we're announcing the delivery and the commercial offering of a software product from a company that many of you know of as a chip company. And I hope by the end of the next hour or so, you understand what we're doing, why we're doing it, and why we think what we're doing is important for the industry and for our customers. Let's start by talking a little bit about data and kind of this era of terabytes and petabytes and exabytes and zettabytes. Sometimes it's hard to get our arms around, you know, what it means to have a petabyte of data. So just to keep it in context, that's about 50 times the amount of information that resides in the U.S. Library of Congress. And if you were to sit down and start watching HD videos, you'd have to sit and watch HD videos for 13 years before you consumed a petabyte of data. And yet that much data is generated on the internet globally every 11 seconds. So we're clearly in uncharted territory, and this doesn't even start to comprehend the kind of data that's going to get generated as we start seeing the Internet of Things and huge arrays of sensors and cameras and other edge devices that are connected machine to machine, generating data on a scale that even makes the Internet interactions between human beings look rather small. So we're in an era of generating huge amounts of data. But the key is now, what do we get out of that? It was interesting. I was at the EMC event yesterday where they announced a significant project of building their Hawk SQL technology on the Hadoop distribution. And they had, what's the guy's name? Harper Reed, yes, sorry, from the CTO of the Obama campaign, who joined on stage at the EMC event. I thought Harper said something very insightful, that he hated the term big data because big data wasn't the point. The point is big answers. How do you actually get value out of data? And that's obviously our challenge as an industry, technology and architecture challenge, in addition to a number of other challenges, to get value out of this vast amount of data that we're generating, and in many cases now learning how to store, but then how do we extract insight from it? And, you know, you could look at big data as just another big buzzword, but at Intel we believe very fundamentally that big data has the potential to not only transform business models, and we're seeing that as people use data as the foundational element, the foundational asset in the delivery of business, but it has the ability to transform society. It has the ability to deliver more personalized healthcare, more effective healthcare, more cost effectively. The ability to manage our scarce energy supply more effectively, to manage traffic, the ability to drive greater levels of public safety. We have an opportunity to harness the power of data, not just to drive commercial success, but to drive success that impacts the entire human race. And that's a huge, exciting opportunity for us to participate in. At Intel, I'm part of the data center group and our software business, but the big data trend transcends the data center and the cloud back end. And in fact, it's intrinsic to our corporate strategy of driving computing solutions to affect the lives of every human being on the planet in this decade. And it comes from a virtuous cycle. We used to think of a virtuous cycle of richer applications demanding the need for more capable hardware, demanding the need, enabling even richer applications. And that really was a spiral that drove our industry for the first several decades. But we're in a spiral around rich data providing richer experiences, experiences on consumer devices that are more intuitive, that are more immersive, that are more anticipative of the consumer's needs based on the data that the devices have, in many cases from the cloud. And as you get those rich, immersive experiences on the devices, you then generate even more data. And that equally applies to those edge devices that have the ability to both generate more data to gather insight at the edge and machine-to-machine communications, as well as being able to take data from the cloud and provide local knowledge and intelligence that affects commercial and society life. So we have an opportunity to drive a new cycle of data and experiences driving data. And those experiences on the consumer devices are really critical because we are delivering capabilities on consumer devices that are very, very powerful and rich, obviously with our long heritage in the PC franchise, but with a growing position in smartphones and tablets. So big data for Intel is not just about driving a data center opportunity, and I'll highlight later in my presentation just how much we think it can affect growth in the data center business. But it's fundamental to driving a cycle of getting computing devices into the hands of consumers, computing devices at the edge of this vast network that are ever more capable to both consume and generate data. Intel has been really driving a lot of the technologies that have led to the tools to handle big data. You know, for some period of time, much of the innovation that's driven our core technology, the CPU technology, the storage, networking technology within our roadmaps has really been around the high-performance computing environment, driving incredible levels of computational scale, and then the very, very large cloud service providers who have a volume scale of the services that really is unmatched. And those two technologies, the kind of massive scale of the data centers of cloud and the massive demands of computational density in HPC, are really driving much of our roadmap around the nature of the CPU architectures, the nature of the way we interconnect them, the place we're driving memory. And both of them have an interesting characteristic that they're both driven in many cases by open source software. Not entirely, but to a large extent, we're seeing a lot of the technology where open source might have once been viewed as a more cost-effective implementation of packaged applications. In many cases now, from the Lustre parallel file system to Hadoop to OpenStack as an orchestration framework, we're seeing the open source technology really drive a lead in figuring out how to handle the scale and the requirements of either HPC or cloud. And that's put us in a unique position to really have some insight into what capabilities are required at a platform level, not just a hardware platform, but also at a software platform level to drive big data and handle the volume, variety, and velocity of data that we're starting to see. So Intel's strategy for big data is very simple. We want to democratize the insights that can be gained from big data from the edge to the cloud. We have a significant initiative at the edge of the network called the Intelligent Systems Framework to try to make sure that the data gathering is more secure, more intelligent, more trusted, and we can get ever more value at the edge of the network because obviously the extent to which you can intelligently filter data and get rid of the noise at the edge of the network makes the data that you gather and centralize ever more valuable. Within the cloud, we're driving platform technologies for a range of solutions. And one of them I'll talk about today is Hadoop, and we think of Hadoop as a foundational technology, but we're working closely with companies like SAP on the HANA technology, which we view as really critical to handling large sets of data. So we have an edge strategy and a cloud strategy, and one of the foundational technologies that we see around big data is the Hadoop framework. Let me talk a little bit about Intel and Hadoop. We've actually been at this for a while. And for those of you who are not familiar with Hadoop, Hadoop is a framework of a dozen or so projects in open source that all work together to store, organize, and get insights out of mass amounts of data. And Intel started our exploration in Hadoop back in 2009. We formed a lab with Yahoo, who brought the Hadoop framework to market in open source, and HP, to do some research and start to understand the nature of the workloads. And from that, we started understanding how to standardize benchmarks to get a sense of how to optimize the technology so that the benchmarks reflected real-world workloads. And then obviously, once you have a benchmark, the next step is to begin to tune and optimize. And about this time, in 2011, we had a number of customers who came to us in China, who were leading-edge companies who were struggling to get the value out of their Hadoop infrastructure, knew that we had some expertise in this area, and we started working with those companies to get some better business results of the volume scale of data they had. And these are very large companies like China Unicom and China Mobile who have hundreds of millions of subscribers and generate billions of call data records and have a lot of data to handle. And we realized that there was a gap in the community around driving the performance, security, and resiliency into the Hadoop framework so that more customers could get business value. So we commercialized that product offering with our first release in 2012, went to our second major release at the end of 2012, and what we're here today to talk about is our third major release of Intel's distribution of Apache Hadoop software to really address some of those critical requirements. So we've been at this for a while, and you can see the commercial adoption we've had largely in China around smart cities, telecommunications, retail, obviously the web companies, healthcare, and there's a number of other verticals and even functional areas that we are targeting to move beyond this. So we have a multi-year history in understanding the Hadoop framework, working with it technically, optimizing it, and delivering the Hadoop framework in commercial environments for customers. And what I'm very pleased to announce today is we're announcing global availability of Intel's distribution for Apache Hadoop software. And we're really focused in three areas. One is we want to drive the framework to take advantage of the latest technology. And this is a very significant step. The Hadoop framework has enormous potential. Today, I think it's often viewed as an offline, very slow batch processing engine for relatively unsophisticated types of data. It can do a lot more if we're to harness the underlying technology that we know is available. And I'll highlight some examples of this in the next few minutes. The other thing we want to do is ideally, as organizations store their data within a Hadoop cluster, we'd like that data to be available to a broad variety of applications. So ideally, Hadoop will be a foundational layer within organizations that then you can build a variety of applications on top of. And that's one of the gaps we see in the ecosystem today. We have a lot of people integrating Hadoop into very sophisticated vertical solutions, and that's a wonderful approach for those kinds of applications. We also have a number of venture startups that are driving innovation at a very rapid pace. But many organizations are looking for a large, stable company to establish that foundation so they can bet long-term to innovate around a stable platform. And that's one of the things we're looking for. We're not looking to move up the stack and provide vertical applications, and instead, we feel like we're a good bet for a variety of ecosystem players to bank on our horizontal distribution and build innovation around it. And part and parcel of that element of being a good partner is to protect, nurture, and drive a common open source foundation for Apache Hadoop. We've become a platinum sponsor of the Apache Software Foundation. We're initiating a number of projects within the Apache community to drive Hadoop forward. We view ourselves as stewards and drivers of open source to make sure that the technology itself stays consistent and continues to evolve and grow. We're very, very committed to making sure that customers who are banking on Hadoop today know that even if they choose Intel's distribution, they're not getting locked into a technology. And we're doing that because we believe that's the best way to drive growth in the overall industry. Let me talk a little bit more detail about the product. And the first thing I'll note is we are delivering a configuration monitoring and management tool that will remain unique to Intel as part of an overall solution. And we feel this isn't part of the core Apache kernel in the data path, if you will, that it really is a utility that surrounds it that's not fundamental toward the use of the underlying technology. Everything else you see on the slide, we are going to drive for any enhancement we make to go back into the open source community. And our goal is that those enhancements, which are all driven by customer demands to improve the performance, security, or resiliency of the framework, that all of those get back into the open source community as quickly as we possibly can so that most of our innovations become a rising tide that lifts all boats. So you can see we've done a lot of work with Hive and HBase around the data layer. We're doing a lot of work to improve the performance of MapReduce and Yarn, and we're doing continual work to provide the performance and security in the Hadoop distributed file system or the foundational storage layer. The gray areas are ones where we are simply integrating and validating the rest of the open source projects into a complete Hadoop solution. Now, where do we see advantages in the technology? If we could advance. There we go. So one of the things we're doing is taking advantage of our platform heritage, our hardware platform heritage. We put into Xeon processors several years ago instructions that accelerate the AES algorithm, which is a common encryption algorithm used in things ranging from disk encryption to SSL transactions on the web. By taking advantage of these instructions within the Hadoop framework, we're improving encryption up to 20 times the speed. Then when you get to that level of performance gain, it really shifts from being a performance capability into being really an ability to turn on encryption or not, because the performance overhead of encrypting and decrypting data without this level of acceleration becomes prohibitive. So we're basically enabling customers to secure their data inside a Hadoop environment. We recently added the capability within the framework to take advantage of solid-state disks and have been doing some testing with our own cache acceleration software, which is value-added software that we started delivering late last year. And the combination of enabling access to SSDs, which is part of open source, and then building in our caching software, we're seeing drive substantial performance gains that I'll show in just a few minutes. We've done a lot to optimize queries in Hive, and we know that ultimately Hive and the current state of HBase are not going to serve all the needs, and we're very excited about various projects and solutions around the industry to get more full SQL compatibility on the Hadoop framework. But it's also in many use cases, by simply accelerating Hive, you have an opportunity to have Hadoop cover more opportunities than it otherwise would. We're also building in other capabilities that are intrinsic to the CPU. So our AVX and SSE instructions really drive that parallelism and compression and other kinds of math algorithms to be substantially faster on Xeon. And then finally, within that management layer, which will remain unique to Intel, we're building some really cool technology that came out of Intel Labs, where we actually use Hadoop on Hadoop, as we call it. We collect metrics from the performance of the cluster and then use machine learning algorithms to suggest improvements to the configuration settings in an automated fashion. And then with those, we've seen 30% performance gains on exactly the same data on exactly the same software. And given that over time, users are going to use their clusters for many things, having this tuning capability is a huge advantage. Again, it's not intrinsic to the operation of the open source project, so customers aren't locked into it, but it's a utility that makes it far easier for customers to get the most out of their infrastructure. These are just a few examples of the kinds of technologies we're driving into the framework. So we are obviously participating in a new business for Intel. And we've made the investments required to have the support to back up the open source framework. So we're selling to end users offerings that have either 24/7 support or 8x5 support to have two different price points. We plan to be very market competitive in this space. We don't plan to either be a super premium offering nor a low-cost leader. We really want to drive the best technology and participate in this market and help it grow. And of course, as we work with a range of partners, some of whom you'll hear from later, we have the opportunity to decompose any of these technologies and do custom innovation to fit the solutions that those partners want to bring to market the most. So we'll have some integrated offerings for end users with kind of a classic open source model of services and support. And then we'll also have technology collaborations that could be very, very unique to each of our partners. And why do we think, we have the background to provide this? It really is a heritage of working with technology. We have the most intimate knowledge of, the computational performance by our leadership position with Xeon processors. I think that's pretty well known. It may not be well known that we're number one in enterprise solid-state disks. We're number one in 10 gig Ethernet. And these are the technologies that in combination, the computation, the solid-state memory, the networking, that all balance together to provide the best results for a Hadoop cluster. And this is very critical because as we get to the point where Hadoop is more interactive, and everybody in our industry knows that that is the path we're getting to, the underlying infrastructure is taxed substantially. On top of the hardware capabilities, we are actually building a good portfolio of system software. I mentioned our caching software that's file-based caching, so it has a lot lower latency. We last year acquired the company that is the primary contributor to the Lustre parallel file system, and we're now working with customers to layer Hadoop on top of Lustre. which in many high-performance computing environments has the potential to do both analytics on the data as well as simulation and modeling all in the same environment. We have our Data Center Manager product, which offers optimizations around the power monitoring and consumption for large-scale data centers. And as Hadoop becomes a bigger part of data centers, that power consumption will be ever more critical. And we've recently been awarded by Forrester as a contender in the API management space with our Expressway Service Gateway product, which is basically a secure way to connect legacy systems and expose the data from those systems as data sources to either Hadoop cluster or to other applications for developers. These are all really system software kinds of products that enable some of the modern usages that we're seeing as gaps. And that nascent software portfolio built on our long legacy of leadership in the hardware platforms gives us a unique capability to think of Hadoop from the ground up. And we embrace that position, that there are other people far more capable than we are to really work at that solution level for customers. But what we can do uniquely is establish the optimized layer of Hadoop as a foundational technology. And to talk a little bit more about this concept of optimizations, I'd like to invite Paul Perez, Vice President and GM of Computing Systems for Cisco, up to get another point of view. Paul, welcome.
Are you expecting a differing point of view?
Yeah. So, Paul, tell us a little bit about how you see the Hadoop environment and the opportunities for optimization.
This is actually pretty interesting because Cisco's strategy is to be a number one IT provider in what we call the Internet of Everything. And that Internet of Everything, I'll define in a moment. But we started executing this strategy a few years ago. And one of the first things that we did was expand our portfolio into the compute space. We went to build an ecosystem of partners, technology partners, go-to-market partners, solution partners, to help us enter the space. And at a time when the industry was skeptical of Cisco's commitment to compute, Intel stood with us. And through that collaboration, the joint innovation, we propelled our Blade server market in private cloud and virtualization to a number 2 position here in the US. And even analysts like Gartner are talking about how Cisco is in the top 2 vendors under consideration for private cloud deployments, and also increasingly gaining traction in service provider. So that's what we have done up until now. What we're going to do in the future is look at how we can transform and improve the way people live, work, learn, and play. And we increasingly see huge opportunities to do so in the intersection of hybrid cloud, machine-to-machine, and computationally intensive analytics. And learning from history, looking to build our ecosystem, and we surveyed the industry, we quickly centered on Intel, not necessarily as a partner, but primarily as an innovation partner to help us drive the technology. And my expectation would be that 3 years from now, analysts will be talking about how the Intel distribution for Apache Hadoop, coupled with the Cisco UCS and Nexus Datacenter technologies, will be the substrate, the preferred platform on which to build analytic solution environments based on Hadoop.
So, Paul, I know we have a lot planned that we're not prepared to talk about today, but it's also fair to say that even in the short term, we have an opportunity for customers who are interested in Hadoop, optimized Hadoop infrastructure. You're open for business now, and they can call, and we have solutions that we're working on that are much more short-term as well, right?
Yeah, I brought a credit card swiper for my phone, too. No, I think that we have already spent a fair amount of time tuning your distribution for UCS environments. It's number one. Number two, we already have expressions of interest. We have gained a fair amount of traction in multiple industries with what we call our common platform architecture for Hadoop and analytics in financial services, banking, insurance, retail, transportation, healthcare, media and entertainment, and federal government as well. So I would expect that in the very short term will drive demand of that common platform architecture with Intel's distribution of Apache Hadoop. And we have created a framework in which we can then expand from there and consider some pretty deep technology and innovation collaborations to expand the ecosystem.
Well, thanks for joining us, and we'll hear more from Paul in just a little bit. Thanks a lot, Paul. Appreciate it.
Anytime.
So talk a little bit more about specifics about how this technology delivers a cumulative value. What we've done here is take a TerraSort benchmark, which is a terabyte of data, into the MapReduce framework on a legacy cluster of about 10 systems. And this benchmark, when you look at kind of a relatively standard configuration, it would be quite common in the industry today. The old Xeon 5600 processor, hard drives with 1 gig Ethernet. This would be with the kind of a standard Apache open source distribution of Hadoop. You can see that this particular benchmark takes greater than 4 hours, and this gets to the concept that I've heard Hadoop referred to as more of a pen pal than an instant messenger kind of solution. And you can see if you have to wait 4 hours, then you go home and come back the next day. But let's take a look at when you start to apply the new technology. The first thing you do is take the new Xeon E5 2600, which is the processor we launched last spring. You take that, and all of a sudden, the cluster performs 50% faster. You go from that and start to add solid-state disks, which we've enabled in our distribution, and we hope to be available in all distributions very soon. And you get an 80% improvement by adding SSDs. You go from 1 gig to 10 gig and get a 50% improvement on top of that. And then finally, you use our software, which has a lot of the optimizations that we hope to get into open source as quickly as possible. But today, if you use our distribution, you get another 40% performance gain. And the cumulative effect of all these technologies together is that something that took greater than 4 hours gets to about 7 minutes. And you can start to see as we move forward and look at even further optimizations, we can get to even very, very complex applications running on Hadoop that get to be closer and closer to human real time, which is our ultimate goal. So we definitely have proven the opportunity to take the framework at a low level and optimize it from the hardware up to deliver a much better user experience. And we've been proven in the enterprise. We are not announcing a beta version. We're announcing version 3.0 available in the second quarter of this year globally. You can see I mentioned China Mobile and China Unicom. We have a lot of other customers in China that wouldn't be as well recognized in the Western world. But we also have been working with customers here in the United States in preparation for our global launch. Obviously, Intel IT gives us great feedback on our own technology. Texas Advanced Computing Center doing a lot of work around the intersection of HPC and big data. McGraw-Hill, a significant publisher. And one of the things I'd like to do, though, is let you hear from one of those customers directly. I'd like to introduce onto stage Satnam Alag, the Vice President and CTO of NextBio. Satnam, how are you doing?
Pretty good.
Welcome.
Thank you for having me, Boyd.
So NextBio is not necessarily a household name, but the work you're doing could affect many, many households in a very positive way. So why don't you share with us a little bit about NextBio and what your experience has been with Hadoop and the Intel distribution?
Absolutely. Cancer is the disease of the DNA, a random set of mutations in your genome, which is very big, with 3.2 billion base pairs of information, could be the cause behind cancer. In the last decade, there have been impressive gains in the area of full genome sequencing, which has, the price has come down 1 million times in the last decade. And this has led to a deluge of big data being generated in this field. We at NextBio find ourselves at the intersection of modern medicine, genomics, and big data. At NextBio, we aggregate the world's genomic data, and by applying advanced analytics, we enable our customers to make new discoveries, to find new drugs, to find new biomarkers, or find the right therapy for the patient. Since NextBio is a data-driven engine, it would have been really impossible for a company such as ours to scale in a cost-effective manner had we not made initial investments in the area of Hadoop and other big data technologies. We personally like the MapReduce paradigm that enables us to write an algorithm once and then scale by adding additional nodes to the Hadoop cluster. About 6 months back, we took the Intel distribution for Apache Hadoop and applied it to one of our clusters. This cluster has run hundreds of thousands of jobs, manages over 10 billion rows of data in HBase, and by combining the right hardware for our workloads with the software, we've seen impressive gains in efficiencies. For example, we've been able to double the throughput by increasing the density of the cores. We've seen impressive gains in compression performance. Lastly, Boyd, I think for companies such as NextBio, it is very important that a lot of companies like Intel invest in this wonderful transformational technology, and it remains open.
Well, thank you. And now you've gotten such great results. Are we done yet, or do we have some more work to do to get you better results to cure more people?
We always have. The amount of data that we deal with is phenomenal, and it's just increasing exponentially. There's plenty of work to be done, and one day we will cure cancer.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. I don't think anything could be more exciting for a technology company than to have customers like NextBio be pushing us on the edges of what is possible to do with the technology to do something as worthwhile as ridding the world of the disease of cancer. So it is incredibly exciting for us and motivating to do even more to accelerate this framework as we move forward. We are certainly not done yet, and that passion for innovation really spans beyond the Hadoop framework as we know it today. We're doing work with Intel Labs. Last year, we announced the Graph Builder program as an open source project to layer graph analytics on top of the Hadoop framework. We were working last year on Project Panthera to provide standard ANSI SQL interfaces to the Hadoop framework in an open fashion. And then just yesterday, we announced Project Rhino, which is basically trying to get consistent security and authentication throughout the variety of Hadoop projects that all need to integrate. The beauty of Hadoop is its modularity, but one of the challenges then is applying something like a security strategy as an overlay because it has to be consistent. So we are looking for ways not just to optimize the Hadoop framework as it exists today, but in the open source community, drive new projects that extend the utility and provide even greater range of flexibility for Hadoop for customers. And why do we plan to do this? I mentioned earlier that this is part of a much larger strategy for Intel to drive devices and the cloud. But in the end, one of our biggest motivators is to drive faster growth of the data center business itself. And that's why we're so passionate about providing a commercial offering that stays true to open source principles. Because we believe that if we can accelerate Hadoop, you see the bottom line is a forecast for the volume of Xeon CPUs that will run Hadoop as it's currently projected. And we believe that if we can light up just a tiny fraction of the data will otherwise go wasted, that will go dark over the next several years, we could pull in that volume ramp from 2017 to 2015 by a full 2 years. And we have an opportunity to then drive substantial growth for the entire industry because of making the data more valuable, more accessible, easier to use. That ultimately is a core piece of our strategy, and we believe that we can't just do this by enabling the open source community. We believe we have to be in the market participating with a commercial offering that customers vote on with their pocketbooks to prove that the enhancements we're making are really the right direction for the industry and to make sure that Hadoop remains a stable, open foundation for our partners to innovate around. And I've talked about our partners. We have a very partner-focused strategy. We're going to continue to work with leading-edge end users like NextBio to drive the technology, but our primary focus is in enabling a powerful ecosystem of customers who can innovate on top of Intel. That's our heritage as a company, to provide an incredibly advanced building block that enables innovation on top of it. And you see customers up here ranging from very large software providers to smaller software providers, service providers who are providing consulting and integration services, service providers who are providing cloud services, system manufacturers who are looking to make Hadoop easier to consume as appliances. We have a broad range of partners who are lined up, each of these, to work with Intel to innovate around our Intel distribution of the Apache Hadoop software to provide better solutions for customers. But at this point in the presentation, I'd like to let you hear from a variety of some of our key partners. What I'm going to do is invite up on stage Girish Janeja, who's the GM of the Big Data Initiative at Intel, and actually the pioneer, the thought leader, the guy who has made all of this happen, and my absolute right-hand man in building this business together. And he's going to host a panel of some very prominent partners who will share with you their perspectives on Hadoop and their selection of the Intel distribution for Hadoop as an innovation foundation. Girish?
Thanks, Boyd. Thanks for the kind words. Good morning and welcome to San Francisco for folks here and those on the webcast. We have a great panel here for you, some of the top companies who are our partners in the Hadoop project that we are talking about today. But I'll capture some keywords from Boyd before I invite them. We are announcing availability of the commercial distribution, the Intel distribution for Apache Hadoop. We are working with ecosystem to allow them to innovate on top. And with that, I will begin to invite some of our partners. Richard Pledrider, Senior VP, HANA Engineering, SAP. Welcome, Richard.
Hi, how are you?
Good. Welcome. Steve Guru, Vice President, Global Solutions, SaaS, a CenturyLink company. Welcome, Steve.
Thanks, Girish.
Thanks for coming. Ranga Rangachari, Vice President and General Manager, Storage Business, Red Hat Software. Welcome, Ranga. And last but not the least, Paul Perez, Vice President and GM, Computing Systems, Cisco Systems. Welcome, Paul. Back again.
Good to see you again, George.
Thank you. Please join me. Good morning. I hope you're doing well.
Yes, good morning.
Great to have you here. Boyd talked a lot, with great passion about the Hadoop community and how Intel is innovating in both hardware and software to drive the community forward. And I think it'll be great to get perspective from each one of you because you represent some tier one companies that are thought leaders in your own domain on what your view is on big data. So maybe start with you, Richard, with SAP.
Sure, yeah, glad to be here. So, big data, it's, from our perspective, three major points. One is big data in memory. Second is complete view of the entire enterprise data or the data elements end to end. And number three is productivity. So Boyd mentioned earlier technologies, Intel technologies such as SSE, instruction sets. So with SAP HANA, we've done tremendous work mapping entire ERP systems into memory, entire data warehouses into memory, avoiding the need to move data from operational into warehousing infrastructures by essentially offering users a single version of the truth. That's the operational part. Yeah? There's much more data, of course, to the enterprise. Okay, so the second part is a seamless view of, and essentially taking big data to big insight, getting a complete view of all aspects of data that's available within the enterprise. Three is productivity. And that means to us, number one, how can I effectively extract much of the data in Hadoop is textual? How can I effectively extract meaning, make sense of the semantics behind that? So SAP Data Services is a product and a technology that's very effective and helps us and our customers to accomplish that. Number two is business intelligence, front-end tools, dashboards, increase productivity, make data available to end users, make it touchable, create insight, go from data to information. So often, of course, we have then also the need to have millions, tens of millions of events that we need to bring into this environment. So how can we, in addition to processing those events, create instantaneous insight as it flows into Hadoop or into big data infrastructure? So that's our view then on productivity.
Right. So the combination of the insights that need to be derived and a range of solutions that need to be brought together to derive that insight is really the key to get value out of big data.
Right, that's exactly right.
Right. Richard, that's wonderful. So Steve, it's great to have a cloud service provider of your stature here with us as a partner.
Thank you.
And I'd love to get that perspective on your view on big data as a cloud service provider.
Sure, happy to. So SaaS is a infrastructure utility services company. We provide cloud hosting, colocation network services around the world. We have 54 data centers spread out around the world. And our clients come to us for high-end services. And we host and manage over 32 petabytes of data and of storage. And these clients are coming to us from many different vertical industries as well as public sector. And based on the amount of data that we look after for them, they're really beginning to ask us and drive us towards big data services and solutions. So it seems a natural extension of our industrialized infrastructure utility services to be able to provide then big data offerings as well.
Great. So as a cloud service provider, you have enterprise data, you have the customer data, and they're looking for you to provide an analytic services on top of that.
Better ways to access the information, to store and retain the information securely, as well as then get the analysis out of it at the back end.
Right. So Ranga, again, Red Hat obviously is no stranger to open source. You're one of the leaders in open source products and services. And interested in getting your perspective in this Apache project that we are all working together on, and a bigger picture on big data, Hadoop and beyond. What's your perspective on the technologies?
Yeah, so in addition to my perspective, given that we are in the midst of this whole open source stuff, there's a couple of interesting aspects of big data. One is the center of gravity for most of the big data projects are in open source. Today, if you look at the open source community, there are over 100 projects, Hadoop, Hive, a whole bunch of alphabet soup of projects out there. But the center of gravity is all around open source, which we feel very good about. The other aspect is industry analyst reports suggest that over 70% of big data workloads run on top of Linux. Right? So if you combine these two factors together, what we are seeing from our customers is that they are interested in making sure that as innovation continues to happen in the open source space, that it truly is open, it's interoperable, it's standardized. So those are kind of the three elements. So we announced our big data direction last week on the 20th. And the seminal part of our announcement in terms of the directional statement was big data is all about storage. You need to store your data, and we are going to be making available the Hadoop plugin for Red Hat storage in the Apache community. So together with partners such as Intel, we want to continue to foster innovation in the open source community.
Great, Ranga. Paul, you earlier shared with Boyd, Cisco's view. It'll be great to get another level of depth in that. How you perceive big data opportunity for an infrastructure vendor like Cisco?
Yeah, Girish, I think that when you look at workloads like Hadoop, like HANA, they are indicative of some secular trends in the market, right? Where just like in a network, the intelligence wants to move to the edge. In analytics, the capability wants to be as close as possible to the application, right? And what that means is you see data today, up until now, data has been structured in general terms into hot, warm, and cold data. And what you see is an evolution towards hot data hosted on solid state, whether it be memory like HANA or solid state drives, and then cold data residing in active storage clusters that are increasingly more and more Hadoop based. So you can derive information from that cold data repository.
Great. That's wonderful to get your perspective on big data. So narrowing down from the largest scope of big data to Intel distribution for Apache Hadoop software, I think it'll be great if you can share, each one of you, and what made you choose Intel as the partner to collaborate with on Hadoop. So maybe start here with you, Paul, and come back the other way.
Yeah, so two quick things. The first one is partnering is very strong in Cisco's DNA. And our CEO, John Chambers, likes to say that, we partner to the death for partners that are there with us. And just like Intel was there with us in the early days of UCS, we like to be there with Intel in these early days of a huge, big wave of analytics that we believe represent the future. That said, we see their innovation portfolio and technologies as being very complementary to what Cisco has. When I look at the optimizations that we can drive in the fabric, the optimizations that we can drive in automated provisioning and orchestration, either at the infrastructure level or at the application level, those are very complementary and they form a whole. So we're looking forward to not only doing that between the two companies, but also working as leaders in the industry to continue building the ecosystem.
Right. And Paul, you're right. It's really about the ecosystem. It's, the industry has to come together to make sure that this wave that's getting generated by the Hadoop-related technologies actually becomes enterprise-ready and gets adopted to solve the big problems we all have in society and in commerce. So, Ranga, it'll be great to get the Red Hat view on what made you decide to work with Intel. I know we've been working together for a couple of quarters now.
Yeah.
So if you can share that.
Well, so much like what Paul said, Intel and Red Hat have had a long history of partnership in multiple aspects, not just technology, making sure that as Intel continues to innovate on the hardware side, the operating system and the rest of the products work, take advantage of that. But in addition to technology partnerships, there have also been numerous what I would call go-to-market partnerships to help customers get the maximum out of the infrastructure that they can get. So today's, as we're standing here talking about this another dimension to a partnership. And one of the things that we absolutely hold very close to our partnership is making sure that all innovation that happens, the community gets, gets benefit out of that. So community-driven innovation, from our standpoint, is a seminal thing that goes across everything that we do.
So our, Intel and Red Hat's long history of open source collaboration extending into Apache Hadoop and also working together in the market to make it successful. That's great. So Steve, again, your perspective as a cloud service provider has unique requirements around Hadoop. So, if you can share what made you choose to partner with Intel.
Sure. I guess we're going to continue a theme here, but going back to the early foundation of SaaS, SaaS and Intel have worked closely back to the Intel Online Services days. And so from that perspective, we're very comfortable working with Intel. Intel's used a lot in our cloud platforms already. Today, our clients are already having us host Intel-based platforms for them, all over the world. So from that perspective, very comfortable with the relationship. I think specifically, as we get into the management of big data environments for clients, it's important to us that what we saw with Intel's distribution of Apache Hadoop is that really focusing on scalability, security, and speed are important to us as well as our clients. As a service provider, we're focused on efficiencies and providing kind of repeatable services and capabilities for our clients as they come to us. And so we've seen that in the distribution, and we're confident moving forward that we'll be able to build offerings and services and solutions around that.
Great. Richard, last but not least, your perspective on making Intel as your partner for Apache Hadoop.
SAP HANA has been an incredible journey. I've been on this journey together with Intel, as you know, from day one. And the type of work that we've been able to do across our labs mutually, bring this technology forward into market has been nothing short of incredible. So we think that we are bringing with SAP HANA in-memory technology and in-memory innovation. We are to the market. We are revolutionizing data management by making it in-memory capable and ready. For big data, we believe that Intel is the right partner for us to then utilize Hadoop and utilize Hadoop-type big data technologies to present a mission-critical, fully enterprise-ready infrastructure across the entire business. Now, how do we move forward? What can we do across HANA, across Hadoop? We have some amazing technologies that we can jointly innovate on and optimize on. Some of that is in the works, as you know. At the same time, of course, we're going to take those technologies back into the open source infrastructure so that all the other big data partners that we are working with, both in the Hadoop community and elsewhere and beyond that, can also leverage that technology.
Oh, great. So as we come to the close of the panel, I'll put you guys on a spot and maybe ask you to give a short statement on what you think your customer would see the value out of your collaboration with Intel on the Intel distribution for Apache Hadoop software. And Steve, in this time, maybe start with you.
So again, as a service provider, the importance for us is to integrate the best technologies and capabilities and provide that in an industrialized fashion as a service. We think that an ecosystem that's centered on the Intel distribution and really focused on those security, speed, scalability from silicon all the way up through services is really where the market's going, and it's hopefully going to allow our clients to achieve the vision for big data faster than they could.
Oh, great. I couldn't have said it better. That's great. Paul, you want to add to that?
Yeah, so I think pretty quickly, we can always talk about the merits of technology. I like to think about the merits of being able to easily adopt technology. And I think to the extent that we can make a Hadoop and unstructured data analytics environment interface pretty seamlessly into existing environments that customers already have will be a big acceleration for adoption. And then the second value from Cisco will be scalability.
Right. And Ranga, you want to add your comment?
Yeah. So looking at it from a customer's perspective, I think majority of our customers are down a journey of open hybrid cloud, which is the ability to deploy their infrastructure on-prem in a private cloud and use a public cloud in a seamless fashion. And our belief is big data could be one of the killer apps for open hybrid cloud. And what customers want is industry leaders to help them in the journey.
That's great. So, Richard, last again, but not the least, the important part here you talked about is how HANA and big data and Hadoop together solve some of the key challenges customers have around analyzing large amounts of data in a time-bound manner. So, performance is obviously important, but beyond that, this collaboration, what do you think is the end value the customers would see?
Well, I think it's back to big insights. What we like to see in the context of SAP HANA at the speed of thought across the entire enterprise, leveraging SAP HANA and leveraging big data infrastructure such as Hadoop, such as Intel Hadoop.
Great. Great. Well, I thank you all for making the trip and participating here on the panel. I'll invite Boyd back for Q&A. Thank you.
Thanks, Gary.
All right, thank you very much, Richard, Steve, Ranga, Paul. Very gratifying to have such a distinguished list of partners, all of whom have, really made a decision to center their innovation around the Apache Hadoop framework on the Intel distribution as a path moving forward. And you heard all of them talk about working with Intel very closely, but all of them embracing this notion of community as well. So, in summary, we're in the market with an offering for our distribution of Apache Hadoop. We think we provide a unique position in this industry. It's a lot of participants. It's a great community, but to have a large company providing a consistent, stable foundation and a commitment to driving that foundation with the underlying hardware enhancements on a sustained basis. Because, our data center roadmap is very, very robust moving forward with new CPU capabilities, new non-volatile memory capabilities, new fabric technologies, and we want to make sure that the Hadoop framework stays on the leading edge of those. We're really building off of a heritage of technology. And while it may seem like a departure for Intel to provide an offering around open source software, we view this as a building block, and that's what we do. We bring building blocks to market, and customers innovate around those building blocks and build wonderful solutions and create growth in our industry. We're going to continue to focus on open source and making sure that the innovations are a rising tide that lifts all boats, We believe that we can continue to innovate at a pace where customers will want to work with us as the market leader, but the goal is not to fork the code or have any kind of dissension within the community. We want to drive this to be open. And then finally, we have a very partner-focused approach. We saw the list of very, very large partners. We have a very wonderful list of smaller partners around the world who are also looking to build on this, and we expect to have a substantial impact, not just on participating in the market for Hadoop, but also in growing the market for Hadoop, which will provide gains not only to us as a software provider, but also as a data center provider. And with that, I'd like to invite Mark Miller on stage, and he'll host the Q&A session both for folks online. You can submit your questions as well as here locally.
Thank you, Boyd. Yes, as Boyd mentioned, we have a couple of mic runners in the room. If you have a question, please raise your hand. Ask that you state your name and organization you're with. Online, there's a place to go ahead and ask your question, feed them into the room, and we'll take some from the web as well. So we have about 10 or 15 minutes worth if there's any questions for Boyd or the partners, and we'll be available after this as well if you guys had some specific questions. Yes, Mark.
How you doing? Mark Hockman with Slashdot. You guys, you said a couple of times that you were going to return these improvements to the open source community. I think the phrase was as soon as you can. Can you give us a little bit more of a granular time frame on that? Are we talking about weeks, months?
Well, we don't control it. The community is controlled by the trunk of what is actually in Apache Hadoop formally for everybody is controlled by the committers, and we're hoping to work with the committers to explain why we've made the enhancements we've made. What technically we've done, and get those enhancements back in. The enhancements themselves are kind of a steady stream of JIRAs that we're submitting. We launched a bigger program around Rhino yesterday that had more of a collection of elements because it spans a number of projects. So if you want to have a consistent security and authentication framework across the projects, you have to kind of work across it. So that Rhino project was submitted yesterday, but we'll submit them on a relatively regular pace. We can't necessarily control their adoption into the kernel. We can only do that as part of the community, like everybody else.
I believe one up front, Josh.
Hi, Boyd. Jeff Kelly with Wikibon. So my question is, how many or do you plan to have Intel employees actually actively committing to Apache projects around Hadoop? And in terms of kind of thought leadership and kind of integrating yourself in that community, how do you plan to compete with, it's all about street cred to some degree in the Apache Hadoop community. How do you plan to compete with the Clouderas and the Hortonworks of the world who have some of the, the leading Hadoop developers, people, Doug Cutting who started Hadoop? How do you plan to kind of integrate yourself into that community?
Well, it's interesting the way you framed it. There's kind of two elements to an open source business. One is the community, where I don't view us as competing with Cloudera or Hortonworks or anybody else at all. We're collaborating to drive forward the open source framework. So we have today 3 committers that work at Intel, and we're always looking to expand our influence in the community. We started off many years ago. We were not a primary contributor to Linux, and now in any given quarter, we're the #1 contributor to the Linux kernel. So we're in this for the long haul, and we do plan to add value to the community over time. But at that level, I would not view us as competing with anybody who are part of the open source community. It's about how do we make a better open source project together. And then in the marketplace, I think we have some strong advantages. The Hadoop Manager, which is kind of a utility around it, we think offers value to customers. We think customers will value, the scale that we bring in terms of global presence, longevity, as well as our technology value add. Customers know that as they work with us, particularly on the leading edge, on the R&D edge, prior to things getting committed, that we're going to be able to anticipate the newest technology and deliver the best results. So I think as a commercial offering, we have some strong advantages. But inside the community, I certainly wouldn't view us as competing. I'd view us as collaborating.
Great. Do we have any other questions in the room or online? Okay, we'll take one in the room.
Thanks, Boyd. You've said yourself you've been at this for some time. What's gotten you over the line today in terms of making the announcement and going formal with the distribution?
You know, it's a really good question. You know, we started this out kind of based on customer demand. And as we built the business in China, it became pretty quickly apparent to us that this was a need globally. So we had made the decision strategically to broaden our footprint in this space really all the way back over probably a year ago. And then the decision to announce it today is really because we wanted to have time to work with customers like NextBio and have some evidence locally that customers were behind the product. We know that I think companies like China Mobile and China Unicom have a huge amount of credibility, but we wanted to have a footprint in the United States. And we really feel like the 3.0 release of Hadoop that has many of these characteristics around security and performance that I highlighted today is a breakthrough release and has the strongest opportunity to deliver value. And that is available really at the end of this quarter and then becomes available globally in the second quarter. So it's a combination of the decision to go has been really some time ago that we strategically decided that we wanted to participate in the market to drive it. And then the tactical reason for launching it today is a combination of getting enough experience with U.S. customers and lining up around the 3.0 release.
Great. Yes, in the front? Or, yeah.
Hi, Don. Don Clark from the Wall Street Journal. So as you've discussed, you've been big contributors to Linux, and I know you've worked on Android and other open source things as well. Why make, you didn't really sell a commercial distribution of Linux, but you're selling a commercial distribution of Hadoop. Why the different approaches in the two areas?
Well, I mean, Intel is a company that has grown in our capabilities around software a lot since the start of the Linux movement, and of course we have great partners in the Linux community that are driving the kernel forward. Who's to say that if the Linux phenomena weren't happening today, we wouldn't try to do the same thing. I think it's a little bit more of when we have an ability to anticipate a trend as big as the Hadoop trend, as big as we expect it to be, I think just by taking an influence model, we wouldn't have an opportunity to grow the market as fast. We talked a little bit, or one of the earlier questions was, how quickly can you get your enhancements into the Hadoop trunk? And the reality is by participating commercially with real customers who are saying, this is the things I want, I'm confident that the community will move faster than if we simply had technologies that we were bringing forward to say we think customers might want these. So I think a lot of it is speed, and then a lot of it is our desire to deliver more and more value as a company as we built, software competencies into being not just an adjacent competency to our hardware competencies, but really being a core competency of Intel as a company. So we're a software company now. I mean, we're one of the biggest ones, certainly with the subsidiaries like McAfee and Wind River. But even in our core business, more and more of our developers are software developers, not hardware developers. So we're a very different company than we were many years ago when the other trends hit. So it's time for us to make the market move at a pace that we think that customers will benefit from by participating.
Here in the middle.
So, Boyd, just building on that, how do you define, right here? Here you go, right?
Oh, there we go. Sorry.
Sorry.
You're dark back there.
Doug Friedman, RBC Capital Markets. How do you define success, and how do we think about this as a revenue opportunity for Intel? You put up there that this is going to assist in selling processors into the server space. But what's the breakdown? Is the software load, what percentage of the total spend versus processor load that a customer is going to have here?
Well, the way I look at it, and I won't give specific numbers, but I will give you a ratio of how we think about it, that I'd expect for every dollar of operating margin we generate incrementally in the software business that will have roughly a 4 times multiplier effect on the data center business. So when people say, what is your driving motivation, I think in the end, the strategy will have a greater effect on Intel's revenue and operating margin by accelerating the growth of the data center, but that software revenue component is meaningful. And also, I believe, by participating in software with an offering that customers are voting with their own pocketbooks around, will have a much greater influence on the trajectory of the data center business itself. But we think in general terms about a ratio about 4 to 1.
How do you define success?
Oh, the question is how do we define success? You know what? I'm not going to lay out a metric. Not today. I think obviously we are planning to participate as a leader in this space. So if in a few years we're not viewed as one of the leaders in Hadoop, then I think it's fair to say we'll have failed. But I won't put a specific metric on it.
Yes, Krishna Shankar, Roth Capital. Just following up on Doug's question relating to the opportunity for Xeon processors and data center. What portion of the data center business today, is driven by things like open source computing, Hadoop, and things like that? And what could that percentage be in a few years? And can you talk about the relevance of Xeon versus Atom-based data center architectures for things like Hadoop?
Yeah, so the first question is how much of the current data center market runs on open source? Then it gets very difficult to answer that question. A significant chunk runs on Linux, as Ranga mentioned. But then when you look at that, you'd say you have many environments are mixed. If you have packaged applications running on Linux, is that open source? If you have things like Hadoop running, but you have elements of packaged applications running on Hadoop. So I think it's difficult to answer your question. A lot of the market, a significant chunk of the market, is running some open source software. Microsoft is working on Hadoop. So is Hadoop running on Microsoft? Would you consider that open source? Both. So many Xeons, if not most Xeons, are running a combination of open source and packaged applications. So I think relative over time, we have projections. I didn't put specific numbers on the projections for the volumes that we expect around Hadoop, but they are significant. Now to your second question, how do I see Atom in the Hadoop space? So far, the vast majority of the deployments we're doing, customers are getting value out of the faster, higher-end CPUs. We showed that with the Xeon 5600 versus 2600 example. And our expectation is that the more utility people get out of their Hadoop clusters, the more they're going to want a balance of compute, network, and storage. So I think a lot of the cases you see where people are talking about Hadoop as a low-end workload, there's a couple of phenomena. One is they're using 1 gig Ethernet, which I would not recommend. I'd recommend that anybody deploying a cluster today use 10 gig Ethernet. If you use 1 gig, you have a legitimate chance to choke off the performance of the cluster, and therefore you wouldn't see the same kind of deltas in performance for a low-end CPU versus a high-end CPU. But that's not a good thing. That's like saying you got a really fast car with a really bad transmission, and therefore you should make the engine less capable. It's like, no, make the transmission more capable. So as over time we might see opportunities for Atom, and we'll take a look at that. But right now we're in a customer-driven technology mode. There are some people in the industry, I think, in a technology-driven mode. As kind of a startup in this space, we're really looking at customer demand, and the customer demand has skewed toward higher end. We have a banking customer in China who actually deployed Hadoop on an 8-way node, kind of what you think of as a big iron scale-up node, because they got much better performance results out of a really fat node. But the sweet spot is kind of high end of the 2-way Xeon market. Seems to be the sweet spot for our customers.
We have time for one more question. Okay. Anything on the web? No? All right. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much.